boys, so first thing I gotta say is wow, was I impressed with this sled. I never thought that they could improve all that much on the axis assault, but somehow with the matrix, lowering the center of gravity, where the rider is on the sled, this thing is even better on trail, and in my opinion, definitely the best crossover sled out there right now. I do want to compare it to the Lynx to just be able to kind of show the differences between each sled if you're kind of between the two. I want to be clear before I get into it, I think both are awesome sleds. Slightly different demographics I think both are built for, but they do have some crossover, no pun intended. So I will kind of discuss that. First things first, I do think flat trail riding is kind of where the assault, shockingly, is a little bit better.
Even the Lynx is pretty tippy compared to this.
I think the Lynx, you do fight a lot more inside ski lift. I showed a clip in my last video, I'll show that again now. With it being uncoupled, and as uncoupled as it is, with basically the front arm and rear arm being completely separate of one another, you do get a lot more front end lift. I have my limiter strap sucked in one hole from stock, so it's actually trying to keep the front end down even more than normal, and I still experience that. Now with additional suspension changes, I'm sure you could tune more of it out, but I would say both sleds lift the skis about the same as far as like going over knolls and like taking off from a stop right now. And the assault handles flatter in comparison to the Lynx, so take that for what you will. I don't know how much you'd have to suck in the limiter strap or change the suspension adjustments on the Lynx to get them similar, but as they are right now, both are pretty playful, and the Lynx is definitely lifting the inside ski quite a bit more than the Assault. Now I did, when I initially got on the Assault, think, wow, this sled's really stiff.
So much different than the Lynx, holy crap.
But what I think I was actually feeling was a little bit less compliance in the rear suspension. It can definitely take big hits, but it's not as like comfortable as the Lynx is. The Lynx can soak up everything, whether it's just on the front arm, just on the rear arm, or kind of like the complete suspension compressing. It's just really good at taking any size hit, and because of that, initially I thought the Assault was stiffer, the Lynx was a little bit softer, but I just think that, like I said, it's a bit more compliant suspension in that PPS3 rear suspension than in the Assault IGX skid. So I'm not necessarily even trying to say it's bad, and I do think, again, you could probably tune it to be a little bit softer in kind of the smaller hits, but I would say, like, as far as like broadness goes, I feel like the Lynx can absorb the little hits better than the Assault, and then both can take the big hits pretty well. And I will still say the Lynx, in my opinion, takes the biggest hits I've ever taken without batting an eye. I've definitely bottomed out Assaults. I didn't bottom Josh's out, but keep in mind it is brand new, so and the trails didn't really give me that many opportunities to do it. In my personal Assaults, there was always a lot more kind of like, I would always call it like track slap, like you could feel the suspension kind of bottoming out and almost hitting the top of the tunnel. I don't know if it actually was, but it would definitely cause me to get on the brakes and kind of try to like steady the sled back out. Whereas on the Lynx, I've never experienced that. I can hit the biggest hits possible and the sled just keeps going. Almost in a scary way. I'm afraid for the day I do find its limit, because it'll be at such a higher level than I've ever experienced before. But I do still think there's a lot more broadness with the Lynx rear suspension, and it does still take the big hits a little bit better than the Assault, in my opinion. Another big one was the clutching. You guys heard me talk about that a little bit in the video. You can really roll into the Polaris. It just gradually takes off. It still pulls really hard in the middle, really hard through the top end. The Lynx, it definitely is constantly like tugging at the leash. I find that I'm kind of one of those guys that like blips the throttle to get like a smooth takeoff. because that's just what I've found is like the best way with this BRP clutching. I don't think it's going to bother everybody. It's not going to be a huge detriment, but on the days that you're trying to ride smoothly, it's definitely a lot easier to do that on the Polaris than it is on the Lynx. And again, on that note, I will say like things like turn in and just the way the sled responds to your body language feels a little less jerky on the Polaris. Like you're not often fighting to keep the inside ski down, so in that sense, you know, you can kind of just gradually slide forward, get a little bit more inside ski pressure when you want it, you know, gradually slide back. Whereas on the Lynx, all of a sudden your ski's coming up, so you got to throw yourself to get the ski back down. And I do really like the Blade DS skis on the Lynx, but I will say they have a bit more of a harsh turn in. They definitely bite a little harder. Sometimes they can kind of cause the inside ski lift, but it's all kind of in a pretty predictable way. Like, you can pretty much expect in most corners you got to move your body to make the sled handle better, so you're kind of already doing it, but that comes with obviously having to have a more physical ride, moving around a lot more, and everything does feel a little bit more jerky on the Lynx. The final thing, I'm kind of contemplating how to say this properly, but I've tried to go through my head on it, and I have like a couple different ways to say it. I felt like the Lynx was predictably unpredictable. You kind of always knew in every corner you were going to have to keep the inside ski down, so you were, you know, kind of setting up for it, planning for it. So at least when I'm on it, I know like this is what that corner is going to require, and I do it. When I was on the Assault, I found that probably for like 80 to 90% of corners, I didn't really need to do anything. But then there was this little bit of time where it felt like all of a sudden this inside ski lift would sneak up on me. And in those corners, I was like really unprepared compared to the other corners that I had taken. I imagine that would change if I owned the sled and I rode the sled a lot. I would be able to kind of read a corner and know, yeah, these snow conditions, that tight of a corner, I'm going to have to move to the inside. But having just swapped back and forth, I found I'm always setting up on the Lynx, so I'm not often surprised or out of my element. With the Assault, there were definitely a lot of corners I took a lot lazier because the sled didn't require as much input, and so I would occasionally have a corner where I was like, oh wow, that came out of nowhere. But I would say a bigger tell is, you know, this sled's pretty new to Josh, the Polaris Assault, and he obviously hasn't ridden the Lynx much. When we swapped around, he was definitely farther behind when he was on the Lynx. Than when he was on his Assault. So I guess that's probably the biggest measure. It would seem that, you know, given an even playing field, you know, not somebody who's had a lot of miles on a Lynx, it's easier to keep up on the Assault, at least off the bat. But for me, and with, you know, having known how to ride the Lynx and all that, I find it a little bit more predictable at the moment. But again, I don't have a ton of time on Assault Matrix sleds, so you know, that's just something we'll have to see down the road how that changes. Overall, like I said, they do have a lot of like crossover in their demographics, but I would say if big bump compliance is your biggest thing, there's definitely a lot to be enjoyed in the Lynx in that respect. If you're gonna be, you know, in the tight, twisty trails or trying to make it, you know, handle flatter, as crazy as it sounds, I would go with the 146 Assault in comparison if you want the uncoupled skids and all those things that come with these two sleds. Obviously, there's things like Renegades out there, there's things like Indy VR1s, there's XCRs, all that, but if you really want an uncoupled sled and you want something that can handle flat and still be, you know, decent in the big bumps and decent in the small bumps and all that, it'd be probably Assault for me. If you want uncoupled with the maximum big bump performance you can get, I really think there's at least nothing I've seen so far that can take big hits like a Lynx. So and it still has really good small bump compliance in my opinion, and it still has a huge range of adjustment that you can, you know, change things up if you had to. So that's kind of what I'll boil it down to. I hope it gives some insight if you're between these two sleds. Definitely ask me if you have any questions. I can try to do my best to answer them down below, and I appreciate you guys watching like always, and we'll see you in the next one.